Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Coach Replay Show. I'm your host today, Cory Camp. And I'm excited because today is our first ever Coach Replay show where we've got a couple of guests on who aren't from the same organization, haven't worked together in the past, at least not to my knowledge. Y'all tell me if I'm wrong. One is a repeat offender here on the Coach Replay show, Kosiorek. Welcome back to Coach Replay. Glad to have you in. I'll have you introduce yourself in a moment. And then we also have Allison Petersen, who I've followed for a while. She leads a wonderful new to coaching Facebook group, and I hope that you'll tell everyone how to find that, especially if they're a new coach. But today we're going to talk about a great topic, which I'll introduce in just a moment. But first, Casey, would you mind kicking things off? Tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Certainly. I am in my 27th year of public education. As one of my mentors would say, I took the stairs, not the escalator. So I have been a teacher. I have been an athletic coach, an extracurricular supervisor, assistant principal, a superintendent of a small rural district, now a superintendent to a mid-sized suburban district. So it's really provided me a great opportunity to hone my skills in leadership. But something that I don't get to do a lot today is around that instructional piece. But I wrote my dissertation, was a program evaluation of a video coaching program I had put in place along the way in another school district. And I'm just really excited to meet Allison today and be a guest on the show and talk about coaching and what an important role I certainly believe it plays in the development and support of our teaching staff. And I just think that it is, I will make the proclamation, the most powerful professional development opportunity for educators today.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Casey. It's exciting to have you back. And you wrote a book, by the way, on video coaching. So be sure to check out our notes and takeaways, folks, so you can see that, because it's a great one. Allison, welcome to the show. It's your first time on the show, but again, I've followed you for a while and your work, and I feel like we are in sync a lot, just as I feel with Casey as well, and some of our views in coaching. So tell everyone just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I love Sibme and all the things that Sibme is doing, and loved presenting at the conference last year, and just really love being a part of this conversation. So thanks for inviting me. So I'm Allison Petersen, and I am an instructional coach. I have been a K-12 instructional coach and a K-8 instructional coach. I actually work in independent schools. And so I'm actually on my 4th independent school. And at 3 of those independent schools, I have launched instructional coaching programs, which basically from the ground up. And that sometimes means I have a team of coaches that we were getting started with, starting a coaching program at that school. And in some instances, that means it's just me and I'm getting things started and I'm bringing instructional coaching to the school. So in that work that I was doing, I found that I needed to connect with some people about this work. And I've always, as a teacher in my career, have always connected with people online and felt like I found an amazing professional learning community online. And so that's when I started the New to Coaching group, was when I was actually moving states to a new school, feeling like a new coach all over again. Mm-hmm. And since then, the group has just exponentially grown. And what's really happening is so many coaches are being hired into the role. So I love what you said, that it's the most powerful professional development for teachers, because I absolutely agree. Job embedded professional development, there's nothing better. But so many are being hired into the positions, but they're not always getting a lot of clarity around what it is that they need to do in their role. New districts are taking on this big old project, and they haven't really had a chance to come up with what their coaching program will look like. So I help with a lot of those things in the New to Coaching group to just help new coaches figure out literally where do I start. And I love that, because I really wish that I had somebody do that for me when I was a new coach. So yeah, this is my 9th year out of the classroom as a coach. And I just truly feel like it's my calling and I love the work. So I believe in it a lot.
Yeah. Well, I love that you're able to join us, both of you, today. And I do think that this topic, I was telling Casey whenever he joined off screen here earlier, that I feel like this is one that comes up into my inbox or my social media feed over and over again. Allison and I were just talking about how it's, even just today, it's come up again. And so I think this is an important topic for this month, as we're talking about our roles as coaches and the varied roles. Kim, my co-host, and I talked in August about the importance of defining and clarifying your role. It's not just that job description that you saw when you applied, but really defining that. Allison's got some great examples of some of those that she's going to share today. But really, here's what we're talking about. And I feel like in some places, it's a controversial topic because for some people, it's the only option they have. But here it is. We're going to talk two options. We're going to talk the should and the can. Should a coach be an evaluator? Should they wear both hats? I would love to know. And if you haven't had a chance to weigh in yet, if you can get a chance to answer our poll earlier this week, folks, I'd love for you to comment below and weigh in. But Casey, Allison, what's your take? Should a coach be evaluative?
I'll let Allison go first, but I definitely, we talked a little bit offline, and I think we may have some similar perspective, but it's all you, Allison.
Yeah. If we're talking about the should and the ideal situation, really, I feel like there is really just the one answer for the should, right? So if you have the other situation, which we'll talk about, then we might have to wade into some waters that we aren't really familiar with. But when we talk about ideally the role of an instructional coach and what his or her purpose is in supporting teachers and being a one-on-one support for their ongoing growth and professional development and the relationship building and the vulnerability that requires, I just really feel like the should answer is that the coach should not be the evaluator as well. And I think it's a blurred line. Sometimes you work very closely with the principal who is the evaluator, who is asking and thinking more like an evaluator, asking you to do things to support the evaluation process. I believe the coach has a role in the overall evaluation process that's being put in place, but overall, should they be an evaluator? I don't think so. So tell me your thoughts, Casey.
I couldn't agree more. I think the should is that coaches should not be evaluators. And I'll tell you this from my experience, and we're up in New York State, and we have this APPR process that's been put in place by the state education department. And I think back to the time that I was in the classroom, and I'm just going to be real here, right, for our audience. But I would evaluate teachers in my role as assistant principal and principal as well. And sometimes there would be this dog and pony show. There would be this, hey, class, we're going to have a pizza party if everybody does what the teacher asks. We're going to teach the lesson on a Thursday, and then we're going to have our supervisor come in and watch that again. And I would crack up because some little person would be like, you taught us this yesterday. Why are you doing this again?
Yeah, there was always that tattleteller, right? Who was
right.
And then she'd be
like, shh, we're not going to get pizza if you don't do this. So, I think my purpose, and I don't know how clear it's been made, but I think that when we're in an evaluative state, especially from my experience up here in New York, is like we're making determination on employment status based off the evaluation. So, broken system by far. I got probably 5 more episodes on that. But so we have this process, right? And we're evaluating and we're deciding whether someone's going to continue or discontinue with us as a teacher. So now I'm the teacher. I have groceries that I need to buy for my family. I've got a mortgage I got to pay for. Am I going to give you my choppy water? Am I going to give you, that piece? And just as Allison talked about that vulnerability, I'm not going to be very vulnerable. So I'm going to give you a very scripted, my best production of what good instruction looks like, because I want to make sure that my evaluation is positive. Now, take the evaluation out of it. And yes, coaching is an evaluative process, but it's done in a very safe way. So if you're starting a coaching program or you're looking to grow a coaching program and you want people to really buy in and give you that piece. Like we've always talked about, it's like a relationship with a counselor or a priest or a rabbi or a very good friend. You have to have the structure put around where you're going to be very vulnerable, because I'm not going to share, like we always talk about when we're working with coaches, like we want to see every day. We want to see things that went well. We want to see things that didn't go well. We want to be able to have that reflection. So, I echo the same. In a should world, I think that coaching should be non-evaluative in the sense of your supervisor. Clearly it's evaluative in the sense that you're reflecting with a coach in a partnership learning relationship to get better at the art and craft of teaching.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
One other thing I was just going to say about that, like when you said that about like how a teacher would respond if it was for evaluation, I mean, teachers are so genuine, like there's a genuineness in teachers. They want to do their very, very best. And they get very, very anxious about this, it's a generalization, but they get anxious about this idea of, am I doing well? Am I doing good enough? And they hold themselves really to a very high standard. And so when they have to sit across from their boss and say, I don't feel like I'm doing this thing very well, it's really hard for them to like say that, so, but if you're sitting across from a coach and you're working, as a teacher, and you're saying like, I just don't feel like I'm doing this part of my, classroom instruction very well, it's safer if you're not the evaluator and you have the ability to come in, and that teacher that, overly anxious to do well teacher is really able to calm that in that environment. So I see that a lot, just a desire to do well, which is the thing that they're striving after really. And they want their boss to think that they're doing well, like they don't want to let anybody down is what it comes to for them.
Well, and I'll build off your point, Allison, which I think is just a great one. But even as we look at student learning or even adult learners, when are we most likely to be focused and engaged in the content? It's when it's something that's of interest of ours. So, I mean, that's no surprise. So early on, at least from my experience with these, as we build these coaching relationships, letting the teachers start to identify their own goals to start, because then there's that buy-in piece. And then this is something that I've reflected on, and that's something that I want to get better at. And then there's this great engagement where through the evaluation process, if I'm a principal or supervisor, director, whoever's doing the supervision, and I'm saying, this is what you're working on, that's very different than let's work together to identify some goals. So it's a very different feeling. So I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think you both make some really, really valid points. And I would say I 100% agree with you, right? There's no controversy there, at least on with the three of us on this episode is if we're in that should world, it definitely, let's draw a line in the sand. And to Allison's point, it's a part of the process, right? In order for me to, meet the expectations in that evaluative process, I have to learn and grow, and coaching is one of the best ways to do that. So the coach does fit in the process, but they shouldn't be the evaluator there. Now we all know that the world is not perfect. We don't always have the resources, whether it's, a single coach, or we might not have any coaches. And Kim and I are running cohorts on coaching all the time. And a lot of our audience members, our participants who are there to learn about coaching, are assistant principals, superintendents, right? They are those who at some point or another, for some population of their staff, wear that evaluative hat. So my question to you all then is, sometimes it's just the nature of the beast, right? We just have to be. And can someone effectively be the evaluator and the coach? I would love to know, like, yes, no, and a quick why, and then we can dive into maybe how, if the answer is yes. Thoughts?
Maybe. So sorry.
Depends on the person.
Sorry, but,
I don't know.
But I think my answer is a maybe, because I think that if the conditions are there, there's potential but I
Yeah.
think it needs to take time, because right out of the gate as a coach, I really think it needs to be separate. And maybe if it is going to happen, like Allison mentioned earlier, there need to be some real clear boundaries.
Mhm.
I almost think it's impossible in a sense, because it doesn't, words and actions are two different things, right? We all know that. And I can tell you, I could say, Cory, you know what? I know I'm your administrator that supervises you, but I'm going to coach you. And I promise those worlds are not going to collide. You may have the relationships with staff where a percentage of staff are going to say, you know what? I think we can do this. I trust Cory. She's a good person. She has a track record of trust and following through with what she says. There's always going to be a percentage of those individuals, no matter how much you say it, are going to be like, I'm just not there. I'm just not willing. So we can't tell, right? I think it's very, very tough to really tell. So if we, that people are being fully honest with us and reflective and vulnerable. And so I think that it's really difficult if you're going to be a supervisor to be able to do that. But I think over time, if you build those relationships and it's a must in your district for some reason because of resources or whatever, then possibly. But I don't think it's the way you want to start out.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'll have to stick with maybe as well. I hate to just go with no, like not.
Oh man.
But here's my thought on this one is like this idea of coaching. If you really get into the coaching literature, that's not just instructional coaching literature, just like about what is coaching. It's truly a way of being. It is a way of coming into a conversation differently than maybe other conversations that you've come into. It is a way of putting questions first, doing intentional listening, and helping someone, if we're really on the facilitative side of coaching, helping someone come to their own conclusions. And so like you can put on that way of being if you are going to be this evaluator coach person, and you can be more question oriented and trying to see if they'll come to their own conclusions and ask them meaningful questions and guide them that way. And so you can coach through those conversations. I really believe you can do that in any situation. I just think that the piece that will always be the undercurrent of it is that, well, you're judging me. And it's very hard, even as an instructional coach, like even when I am not the evaluator, it's very hard to convince teachers that I'm not judging them. And it comes with that way of being and how I make sure that I'm not, sometimes I don't even give my positive feedback until we've gotten further into the conversation, because even that is an element of judging and evaluating is, oh, you did so great. It was so great. You know, that can still be a form of evaluation. And then they perceive if I don't say that, then they must not have, you know, so I think that, so anyway, I think the maybe part comes from being more coach-like in every conversation. That's Michael Bungay-Stanier's approach in his book, The Coaching Habit. And you can do that. And you can do that in any role. And I think if you develop your coaching skills, you can be better at it. But that undercurrent of evaluation will just kind of always create a distance between you and the person, I believe. And that the depth of relationship that you can build with someone when it's not evaluative is just deeper. And therefore the change can happen on a deeper level.
So I'm going to go out there and say, yes, I think you can, but the caveat is that there's those conditions in place and that you've got those skills. And I'll tell you, it's not an easy thing to do. Having been on the campus administration side of things, who was also that kind of trying to be that coach type of instructional support. It's not easy, especially if I'm highly aware of the data, which our coaches are as well. But, you know, as a campus administrator, I've always got kind of this almost deeper sense of urgency of where the campus is going, where the district is going. And it's really hard, to Casey's point, for me to hold back and go, are you sure that's what you want to work on? Are you sure that's where your heart's going? Because I really see you over here, right? Like it's difficult to do that way of being, Allison. You're absolutely right. It is a whole different kind of persona. And I think that people can do both of those. I think though that you're always going to be pulled one way or the other in your work. And so I mean, for me, and I'm going to let you guys talk a little bit about your thoughts on like the conditions. And Allison, you've already spoken a little bit to some of the skills. I think if that has to be your reality, if you have at least another person in the evaluative role, like on your campus, and you've got your who you evaluate kind of the separate groups, maybe you coach each other's about, like you switch, right? So I'm not coaching somebody that I'm evaluating. I've seen that work in campuses. Now, that wasn't the only condition, but that is one way that I've kind of really seen it, where I'm really not your evaluator and your coach, but I'm a evaluator and your coach kind of thing. So I'm really curious. Casey, you talked about the conditions, and Allison, I think you've got some really good, because sometimes that's not the space we're in. We're in that ideal where the coach is in, and there's still this kind of sense of evaluation, like you just mentioned, where people are thinking you're still evaluating me. So I know you've got some really good ways to clarify that. But Casey, let's start with you. What role does culture play in an organization in this, and what conditions need to exist if that's our reality, where the evaluator is also the coach?
Well, I think it depends on the district that you're working in and the experience they have with instructional coaching. So if you're going into a district that hasn't experienced instructional coaching before, you really have to go slow to go fast. So for this to be successful, it's one wrong move early on can tank a program, right? Because, when we're talking about evaluation, I was just thinking while you were speaking, and now I will say your yes may actually be a maybe. And I say that tongue in cheek because,
come on.
because when you explained it, if you were to have the administrators shift those roles, like you said, which I think is a great idea, that truly gives you a situation where you have that confidentiality and evaluation piece. Mm-hmm. Because if you were the evaluator and the coach, it would just take one time for a teacher to be discontinued, and you're not going to get anybody to participate in coaching if it's an optional program in your school district. So if it's a mandated program that you have to participate in any type of instructional coaching, then maybe that's a little different. But I think I can give the perspective of more of a structure as far as not an administrator also doing coaching, which I love your idea. I think might steal it if we have to. But I think that, like some of Harvard's research around the best foot forward, having the ability to work with a instructional coach through multiple sessions, or in our case, because we use video in our coaching, recording multiple videos, working with the coach in a non-evaluative way to then get yourself to record a video to be submitted for evaluation. So then it's a little different in that sense. And I think that the training for instructional coaching and making sure that our administration has that appropriate training, I think is brutally important because many of these administrators are administrators. I'm an administrator. You've been an administrator. You're trained in a certain way with the evaluation, and evaluation and coaching are very different, as Allison referred to. I use the analogy, like the definition of leadership is getting people to a place with maybe them not knowing they're getting to that place. That Jim Knight talks about that partnership learning. It's those prompts. It's not leading the witness, if you will, but it's getting them to see it on their own, even though in your head, where you want to take folks, but you need to help them get there on their own. So to me, I just struggle a little bit with how radical each of those roles in a district are and how different. And that's why I like the idea of maybe switching it. Something that we do too is you receive multiple evaluations. So you're going to be evaluated by your building principal. You're going to be evaluated by an assistant superintendent for instruction, possibly. You might be evaluated by a director. So during your time, we talk about that inter-rater reliability piece with evaluation, and it's not a perfect science because we're all different people and we see things different. We have different lived experiences, but then there's some trends where we're just not saying it's Casey seeing something all the time, all this way. You have some different perspectives. So I think possibly if you were to get into multiple individuals, then it might take away a little bit of the concern around that. But I think it's a challenge. And I think that over time, if you build a culture, and I know I'm being long-winded, but over time, you might get people to the point where they're okay with their evaluator also being their coach. But I think it's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, I think I hear there that like you truly need to, and really this is what the evaluation process should ideally be, right? Multiple observations, we've got inter-rater reliability, we're all seeing and speaking the same language. We don't always have that, right? Sometimes it's a quick pop in or look at a lesson plan, and then I come and observe you during that observation. Like that's kind of feels like this one shot to get it or not, which doesn't create that culture of learning. It creates a culture of performing, right? And I think one of the other things that can be difficult, and I think this is going to lead us right into Allison's point that I wanted her to share, is we use the word feedback and evaluation, and we use the word feedback and coaching. And we really don't talk about, like, for some of my campus administrators that go through our cohort, where we introduce the partnership principle and Michael Bungay-Stainer's work. And I love his newest book on the advice trap, and also with Pete Hall and Elisa Simmerall's idea of like feedback is it's a dialogue. It's not just I gave you feedback. It should be a conversation, or you really haven't had feedback. Like if you're thinking of it in this coaching term, and that's often very new for a lot of my folks who have only been trained in feedback in an evaluative manner, right? It's something I leave with you, you do with it what you should, hopefully. And coaching feedback it's a conversation. So I think those are some really good points. And again, like kind of understanding the context of where you are and what coaching has been or how it's been perceived so far by folks. Because it's been around for a while now in education, but it's still highly misunderstood, I find, at all levels in education. So Allison, I'd love for you to share a little bit about, defining roles, because again, I still have to, clarify in every new coaching partnership that I have what my role is, how it impacts evaluation or doesn't, because I'm seen talking to the supervisor or those who are in the evaluation mode. And so by default, right, like it's just like, what are you going to share with them? So what are your ideas for how we can kind of coexist evaluation and coaching, some of the best ways to do that, how to define those pieces?
So going back to your idea about feedback and coaching, I just did a lot of thinking about that. And like the idea, when you research the effects of feedback, especially some of the things that like you'll find on Harvard Business Review magazine and like Michael Buckingham and some of the things that they have written, like this idea of like feedback being very much triggering to fight or flight type of responses. And even positive feedback can have that type of effect. It's so interesting. So you kind of put coaching on one side and feedback on the other. And so if you can figure out a way to just stay more on the coaching side as an administrator who is trying to give feedback and try and be less directive and more questioning around some of the things that they're seeing, and then some of the student behaviors that they're seeing and wanting, that the teacher wants to see. So those questions can just help you in this scenario clarify this idea of what are you doing here in this conversation. We're just trying to get to the bottom of what is the student behavior we want to see and how are we going to make that happen, and being a lot less directive. So even if you are going to be an evaluator, trying to not make it so blunt and directive, but more something that can be discovered by the teacher. And then there's always an in-between. There's always a place where there might be something that's mentioned that is more directive. But when it comes to actual role clarity, I think that it has to happen in every conversation. So if you're going to be both evaluator and coach, and you're finding yourself in that position, and actually sometimes instructional coaches, even though they're not evaluators, are asked to do evaluative tasks. And so like they're asked to go do walkthroughs and leave feedback. Like that's something that a lot of coaches are asked to do. And so that is an evaluative task, even though they're not an evaluator. Even if they just leave positive feedback, you're still evaluating, right? So you got to be real careful with it. But anyway, so when you are in any conversation with a teacher, trying to clarify what role you're wearing, which hat you're wearing right now, which role are you focused on right now? This right here is a coaching conversation. Our intent for this conversation is, and being very intentional about, and these are coaching skills, coming into a coaching conversation and defining what is about to happen and what we're doing. And then if you happen to be in an evaluative conversation, like Casey said, has submitted a video that is for evaluation, and we are going to talk through this video. This is an evaluative conversation, and just clarifying that in conversation and helping to establish that clarity with that teacher as you're working with her can just be really helpful. It sometimes feels awkward to do that because they're like, well, don't they already know? But no, they don't really know which hat you're wearing right now. And so you need to clarify which hat you're wearing.
Yeah. Because it's not like we actually have like a physical cue, right? So you've got to use that verbal cue. Or, I mean, if you've got a fun coaching hat / admin hat, bring it. I mean, yeah. Next one's the perfect one for that, right? We're all going to be dressing up for Halloween, right? But I think that's such a good point. And then I think it's also important, this brings up a good conversation around, looking at the tasks that we do or that we ask our coaches to do. If this isn't the world that we're living in, or if it is, like, how do we make sure that we're really clear? Brene Brown says, clear is kind. How do we make sure we're really clear around what it is we're doing, the purpose of this? So teachers are going a million miles an hour, and so are we. So let's just take a moment to identify where we are and what we're about to do. I love that. I think that's great. I know, Allison, that you've got some examples of some coaching roles that we're going to have in our notes and takeaways. I think we've talked for a while today, so we're coming to the end of our episode, but I do want to point out again, be sure to check out and download our notes and takeaways. You'll find out how you can follow both Casey and Allison. If you're a new coach, definitely join that Facebook group. I am not a new coach, but I'm in there because there's so many good and innovative ideas shared by that group. It really is an inspiring group. But you'll also see the link to Casey's book and Allison's examples as well. So it's never too late to clarify roles and responsibilities. It's never too late to try something new and identify, where we are and what we're doing together. So
yeah, to that point, like even as a teacher, when you reset procedures, like if you feel like you started off the year without a lot of clarity around your role and you think, well, I can't go back and clarify my role now, you can find an opportunity to do it. Find a group, a faculty meeting or a PLC meeting or some opportunity to come in and say, I just want to tell you a little bit more about what coaching really is and the intent of my work with you. And so that it creates a calm, especially if you're able to say, I'm not an evaluator. Right. It creates that calm. Or if you're someone who's juggling both hats, then clarify what it will look like when you're coaching and what it will look like when you're evaluating and how they'll know the difference, and that you'll try to verbally tell them. Like those are very clear as kind type of statements that sometimes we think people just will understand it on their own. So don't ever be afraid to step back into creating clarity, especially around your role.
Yeah. And I think, be vulnerable. I think Casey, I think from our conversations in the past, you probably have had some experience with doing things like this in your leadership role where you say, hey, I'm in new waters and I'm going to try, but if I slip into the admin or if I slip out of this, hold me accountable, right? Let me know, tell me if it's working for you, or if I need to find somebody else that you'll feel more comfortable with. It could be a peer. It doesn't always have to be someone out of the classroom either. So yeah, Casey, do you want to add any other thoughts to that?
No, I agree. I was actually in my evaluative role today with someone saying, I just want to litmus test this right now and say, am I supporting you enough? Am I involved with you enough? Am I not involved with you enough? when we talk about a larger cabinet of administrators, like some people want a more fluid level of feedback or check-in, and others don't. And so really finding if they're performing appropriately, what's that best fit? So I can really appreciate your comment about gauging where we are in that relationship. And that's really a page out of the coaching playbook, as Allison was mentioning, really the questions around that. So, if we're going to become good evaluators, I would always encourage people to use more coaching practices. And I think that's where we should be. And sometimes I think the field generates some really great work around what it should look like. And, I know we all have to work with the governments in our state and whatnot. But I think the field could really move the needle as far as how we grow teachers, administrators, and others that work in the district, having more of a coaching type relationship in that process. If you want to see that improvement, if you want to see, we're talking about a nationwide teacher shortage. How do we address some of that? We implement things like coaching. We get away from that traditional evaluation, and I guess there'll always be a time, I guess, that we need to do that. I hope not, but that coaching, the skills that we use in coaching is how you create a welcoming and affirming environment for teachers to be reflective and grow. So I'm just as excited to be on the show, to meet Allison, and to see you again, Cory. It's great to talk about coaching and really the influence it can have on our profession.
Yeah, absolutely. I think both coaching and evaluation, they both at the core have that, purpose of being there as a growth tool. One is a much better vehicle, I think, and has been taken as a much better vehicle than the other. But I think they're both important. Both evaluators and coaches have important roles. But I'm with y'all. If we can, focus a little bit more on our coaching hearts and employ those skills and practices a little bit more, we can really probably change cultures that are going to retain and keep teachers. So, well, I thank you both so much for joining us. Allison, any last words before we let our audience go today?
Well, just thank you so much for having me. And it was really great conversation. But I just think to encourage that coach / administrator who is trying to juggle both. I mean, I'm always one to encourage a new coach or a coach who's feeling like she's not so sure about her role, because it's not uncommon for coaches to wear two hats. Sometimes they wear intervention and coaching. Sometimes they wear administration and coaching. It's multiple hat city around our role. So I think it's just knowing that as you are stepping into those roles, that the more that you can think about coming into it as a coach with the heart of a coach and someone who is not trying to do too much advice giving, just holding that back a little bit longer, like Michael Bungate Sr. says, is that you can do this work, even if you're being asked to do both. So it's just an encouragement to you if you're out there trying to figure it out, because it's hard and it's not ideal, but you can do the work.
Yeah. I love that. All right, folks, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to us on your favorite channel. Follow us for more. Thanks, y'all, again, so much for joining us. And everybody can follow you if they download notes and takeaways. Thanks, everyone, and see you all next week.
Thank you.